At the height of my golf aspirations, I lost the use of my right arm. My right hand started swelling. I can't use my arm at all. I can't even hold my own cup. Can't brush my own teeth. I had another doctor say, oh, it's a chronic condition. You'll never recover from it. You should just quit golf right now. It's like, I don't understand why this is happening to me. And, why now? Why this year when I'm close to reaching sort of the goals? So at one point, they were like, you might need to amputate. I had to remove my first rib and a few muscles. You've got more than 100 different decision-making factors, and you have to make that within 90 seconds. Like, I was no longer just Jen the golfer. It was much easier to let it go.
Hi, Jen. Welcome to Thriving in the Age of Disruption podcast series. I'm really excited that we managed to sync our time to have this session. And I usually start off by asking our guests to introduce themselves. So if you could share a little bit about your background, what you do personally, professionally.
Thanks, Dr. Ramesh, for having me. I like to say that I've had a first career. Trying to chase a little white ball around the world. I dropped out of school to try and turn professional and make golf a career of some sort. I was an aspiring professional golfer at the start. And I think that experience really led to me visiting now 50 over countries. I got the chance to, meet people from all different cultures and understand sort of like different issues that exist in those countries. And I think that really led me to develop a deeper appreciation about inequalities that exist. I know it's a bit ironic because I played golf, and what could I do to contribute? So when I had to retire, unfortunately early due to injuries, I had 5 surgeries in 5 years. I went back to school. I studied public policy and psychology with the goal of how can I contribute to building a better sort of world. That led me to exploring the deep tech ecosystem as well as understanding, venture philanthropy and what I could do there. So today I lead our advisory team at Majority Trust. Essentially, we're a philanthropic platform that works with donors, funders of all kinds, and my goal is to help them realize their impact.
Wow, that's a lot, Jen. So I'm going to break it up so that we can do a deep dive in this podcast. I have 2 mindsets that I like to explore with our guests. The first one is called the entrepreneurial mindset. And I define the entrepreneurial mindset as one whereby an individual is being resourceful, which means that, you can define a problem and get to work on that. Number 2 is you're also able to manage uncertainty and take risks. And of course, create value both for yourself and others, as well as financial and non-financial. When I looked at that journey that you made from being the first female golfer in Singapore to be on the LPGA Tour, got a lot of great titles that you've won in a very short span of time. Being a school dropout is also a nice title, right?
Yeah.
Or even, like you said, going into early retirement.
Yeah.
From your first profession, and then pivoting to public policy, not like someone who just did that as an education, but that whole journey into public policy came from a deep connection that you had to what you experienced in your golf tours to 50 other countries, right? And seeing the inequalities that people suffered from. So let's decode for people what is entrepreneurial mindset,
Yep.
where you've been resourceful, where you've had to manage uncertainty or create value.
The goal was to become the first Singaporean female or as Singaporean golfer to qualify for the Olympics and then and then play on the LPGA Tour. I never actually made it there, so didn't achieve that goal. But I'm very happy to say that one of my younger teammates, Shannon, actually made it to the Olympics. She's probably gonna win a major at some point. I mentioned that also because I think the entrepreneurial sort of mindset, it's a lot about trailblazing. I'm a firm believer that we have a rather short life that on this earth. If you think about the average life expectancy for females, 82 years,
Yes.
right? What can you do with those 82 years? And I think you can't sort of change the world in 82 years, right? You certainly can sort of put the steps down, right? For someone else to then take it forward from there. I've also benefited from others leading the way and trailblazing paths that otherwise I would never sort of been able to go on, right? Yeah, and I think as a female athlete, that's very prominent. Because of the whole suffrage movement that led to certain very prominent female athletes that have led to now much greater gender equality, right, in sports.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think trailblazing is one. The reason why I like golf so much is because I feel like it mimics life a lot, right? If you ever play golf, like it's an incredibly frustrating sport. You play 18 holes, and then over the course of a week, you try and outcompete everyone. But actually, I think of it as not just like every tournament, right? You play the game for life, right? And
Yeah.
if you think about every hole that you play, you're always going to be faced with like adversity and uncertainties and challenges. As a golfer, in every moment when you make a decision as to what shot to hit, you have to take into account wind direction, wind speed, where is the wind, whether it's low, it's high. You have to take into account how your ball's sitting on the grass, what kind of grass, how thick's the grass, what direction the grass is going to. You have to take into account the distance, then where you want to hit it, what does the green look like. So you've got, I think they estimate like more than 100 different decision-making factors, and you have to make that within 90 seconds, right?
Wow.
So I think in some way it's a lot like life, right? We go through life with making decisions every day. And I think the most important thing is understanding what are revolving door decisions and what are closed door decisions, right? And you realize that actually you have a lot more room to fail, to try different things. And I think Jeff Bezos is famous for making this part of their company culture in knowing that actually this is a decision I can make, that I can actually make a wrong one and it's fine because I have a next one sort of to make, right? And so the goal is just how do I not make the same mistake twice? And I think that's sort of key because we can't quite predict, even the sort of title of this podcast, In the Age of Disruption. I think it's quite hard to predict like what the world is going to look like. But if we continue to try and make good decisions and then learning from them every day, like sort of your 1% better every day sort of mindset. I think that's how I would define an entrepreneurial mindset.
What I took away from this conversation is about being a trailblazer and how you associated that with being an entrepreneur, because in some ways, an entrepreneur is trying to make something happen that was not there before. They're a leader, right? And they can be selling the same product or the service. But what's unique is that for them, it hasn't been done before. So they are a trailblazer. And I also love the fact that, you talked about women in sports and how, especially in a sport like golf, where you don't have as many women, and how you've had to stand on the shoulders of other women sports athletes. You also moved on to deep tech, and that's another area that you don't have as many women, right?
Yep.
And did you find that easy?
I think it's how you define easy, right? Maybe just to go back a bit, I guess the deep tech aside. I live in Singapore where the education system is incredibly competitive and, there are elite schools that every parent wants their kid to go to. So I went to one of those schools, but not because of academia, but because of sports. Because I was, a decent junior golfer, and then I got into, some would say, sort of the best girls' school there is, right?
Which one is that?
I went to Raffles Girls' School.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think I remember people asking me like, oh, is it very stressful? Like, was it very hard for you? Because I obviously was not so academically inclined. And there's a reason for me sharing this story, linking it back to deep tech and trailblazing. I think at the end of the day, you just have to define the arena that you want to play in. Like, because when I was there, like, I was the athlete, right? And I had a lot of friends and I did decently in school. But I think the moment you start off with, oh, I'm not as academically gifted, I'm not as smart, I'm not as capable as my classmates, therefore I should do worse than them. If you start with that deficit mindset, that's what's going to happen, right? But I think if you start by going, what skills and contributions and value can I bring to this community? And you reframe it that way, then all of a sudden, actually, you are a very valuable member of that community, right? Because, maybe I bring balance and, different life experiences than my friends who spend, a lot more time, in specific subject areas, right? So I think that applies to both whatever sort of career path or industry. Like, I think sometimes you define yourself by, for an athlete to go back to school and then go into, whether it's deep tech or any other industry, it's incredibly difficult because you have a lot of imposter syndrome. But if you reframe it to say, okay, like if I were to want to achieve this goal, what steps do I have to take, right? What parts of myself can I bring into the conversation? What strengths do I have? And then what weaknesses do I need to work on? I think that automatically changes, how you think about whatever industry that you're going into. Even though right now, I work in the philanthropy sector, I wouldn't rule out, changing in the long run.
It's funny because coaching as an industry started because people in sports were wanting to up their game.
Yep.
And knowing blind spot, I'm sure that's why reframing and perspective is such a big part of your DNA.
Yeah.
So I want to back up a little bit and ask you, why golf?
It's a funny story. So my parents are divorced. Yeah. So I live with my mom, and then I sort of spend weekends with my dad. So he was in the IT industry at that time, and just sort of started picking up golf for entertain clients and stuff. Golf just happens to be a very good way to spend a Saturday afternoon. Right, you have an excuse to be out there for 2, 3, 4 hours at a time. So he introduced me to golf. My parents are not big golfers. My mom doesn't play. Yeah, and I started there. I became quite obsessed with it like really quickly. So I started when I was 11. By 13, I was on the national junior team. I think there was a part of me that I felt was missing. Like, so I think, with my parents' divorce, I had a challenging childhood. And golf just filled a hole. Like it gave me something to focus on. I had something to do with a lot of my time. So I spent a lot of time and effort, building at the golf course, training, practicing. I hate losing. So I joke that I joined the National Service Resort and Country Club. I happened to join at a time where there were quite a number of like national players who were members of the club and then were part of the junior team. So I started when I was 11. Most people start when they were earlier. And I think that worked to my advantage because I saw that I was always sort of the underdog, or I was always not as good as the rest. So it pushed me to work harder because there's no shortcut for like hard work. So that's what I did. And then my dad stopped playing about maybe 3 or 4 years later. The joke is that once I started beating him, he didn't want to continue. I joined the national team. And as I mentioned earlier, I love it because as a very competitive person, it's just a sport that can't be perfected.
Yeah.
Right. So you're always feeling like I could have done something better. So I think that chase for adrenaline, right, and wanting to keep getting better is actually what kept me in the game longer than I thought. But I like to sort of joke also that I think it didn't matter whether it was golf or, I don't know, kayaking or sailing or whatever else, right? Like I am thankful that I'm actually naturally quite athletic. The whole idea was, pick something that you love and then obsess over it and then, spend all the time doing it. Eventually you're going to be half decent. So I'm sort of a firm believer that like talent is really only, I don't know, 20%. I mean, there's certain situations where you can't overcome the lack of talent, right? But I think there's many examples in the world where there's lots and lots of people who have actually spent way more time than you had imagined. So you assume it was talent, but it's probably because they put in, a lot more effort. Yeah.
That's right. You're pointing to something in the world of mastery. And that is that when you start something, you've got to obsess over it.
In some way.
And yeah. And that means discipline. So let's pivot now to the next mindset, and that's about a crisis-ready mindset. I define a crisis as a setback, a failure, and it's one of those moments where you either die or you live. So you've got to do something about it. And some of us can, fight back, and some of us, will flee from the place, or some of us might just freeze. People who have actually built up their resilience over time, one, have a good support structure, and two is that they have coping mechanism. So, I like to engage with you on, let's say, pick the worst crisis so far, right?
Yeah.
And, take us through that and maybe even share with us what could have been that daily practice that grounded you,
Yep.
that, allowed you to move forward.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I'm just thinking through the many life crises I've had. Some, entirely my own fault. I'm quite an adventurous person, so
Yeah.
have done, some hikes that I probably should not have done.
Oh, I
Climb
can.
as well. So maybe there were a few defining moments in my life, but I'll center on one. So I think at the height of my sort of golf aspirations, lah, I wouldn't even call it a career at that point. I I I was playing golf one day with a couple of friends, and then I suddenly couldn't use. I lost the use of my right arm, so my right hand started swelling. I mean, as an athlete, like injuries happen all the time, so I was just like, okay,
Yeah.
it's just another one, right? I went home, and then and then it didn't go away for about 3 days, and I needed to fly to Hong Kong actually for a tournament, so I was panicking a bit lah. So I went to A&E. I was shocked because they admitted me into the hospital for a week. I was put under like every test under the sun. And by the end of January, so this happened on 1st January, I still did not have a diagnosis and I didn't have use of my arm. So I had doctors tell me all sorts of things like, it's all in my head. One referred me to see a psychiatrist. I had another doctor say, oh, it's a chronic condition. You'll never recover from it. You should just quit golf right now. And it was very hard, I think, for, at that point, I was 2016 for a 21-year-old, who's decided to drop out of school to go play golf full time. When they finally discharged me, I saw like 25 doctors, something like that, like of all different disciplines. To not have a answer, like a diagnosis, was to me it was a huge crisis. Like I remember at that point praying that I would find like any diagnosis, right? If it was bad, at least it's something that you can work around, right? It's the sheer uncertainty of not knowing what it was. You can't deal with it, right? So there was no form of treatment. And I also quickly learned that in medicine, the moment that they can't find a diagnosis, they just sort of give you this sort of seemingly random thing. The pain management specialist said, oh, I think it's this thing called complex regional pain syndrome, which essentially means it's complex, it's localized, it's painful, and it can't be there's no treatment plan for it, right? So I was prescribed a whole bunch of pain medication, and like nerve relaxants, to the point where I wasn't legally allowed to drive. I felt numb.
Wow.
And to go from someone who was I spent 20 weeks the year before, like on tour playing elite high performance golf. I was in the gym 6 times a week, to someone who was, like I can't use my arm at all. I can't even hold my own cup, can't brush my own teeth. It was like, yeah, that was pretty debilitating, right? So yeah, but I think at that point, I would be lying to say that I didn't go through maybe a week of just being completely depressed and like sort of out of it, right? Like I was just like, I don't understand why this is happening to me, and why now? Why this year when I'm close to reaching sort of the goals? And then I think a week later you realize, okay, I can continue to wallow in sort of self pity, or like actually do something about this lah. And I think it's actually the years and years of training, and I mean both physically but also mental sort of like sort of psychological training as an athlete that sort of prepares you for moments like this, right? Where you sort of go, okay, like this is what I have to work with. What can I do to get myself out of it? So I started doing a lot of reading myself. I sort of became my own mini expert on my own condition. And then, I sort of started knocking on many different doors. I spent time with doctors in Melbourne. By the end of the year, I had moved to the US. So I went back to school. I knocked on doors of sort of different doctors that I thought could make a diagnosis. Eventually, it was through a chance encounter where someone, sort of a sports doctor saw me and then understood sort of where I was coming from and didn't sort of give up immediately, right? She understood that as an athlete, like my whole life revolved around, trying to pursue this, right? Because she was a sports doctor herself. Let's try and figure out the different options rather than just give you yeah. So at one point, they were like, you might need to amputate, or I needed to lie on like a device every night that like sort of stimulates your spinal cord. To which I was like, I'm 21, like I'm not going to do that for the rest of my life. Eventually, the diagnosis came around from that sports doctor. I have this thing called thoracic outlet syndrome. It was quite a simple, straightforward surgery, except that I had to remove my first rib and a few muscles. There was no way of really knowing whether I had the condition unless they did an exploratory surgery. So I did it because I mean, yeah, to me it was like it was a no-brainer. This is the only way of sort of knowing what are the sort of daily practice, right? I think to me it's not a practice per se. Like I mean, back then I was a lot more into meditation and sort of finding balance and calmness. But I don't think that was it. I think the practice goes back to what we spoke about earlier, which is if I'm faced with a situation, like what can I do to get out of the situation? And then weighing out the risks. I mean, the worst that can happen is they cut into me and then they don't find anything. It's the same as the point that I started with, which is I don't know what it is, right? So at least I've sort of chased that path.
Right.
And I think it's that same mindset that I use when I think about crisis, which is use picture or visualize what is the sort of the worst thing that could happen. And then you figure out like whether a risk is actually a risk. And because I think oftentimes we overplay the sort of emotional aspects, right?
Right.
I'm going to go through this 4-hour surgery to remove my rib. I won't be able to speak or talk or eat for a week. And then you're just like, oh, I don't want to do it, right?
Yeah.
But I guess for me, it was, if that was a step I needed to take in order to regain my life back then, it's worth the risk, right?
Yeah.
So that crisis shaped my life in ways that I could never imagine.
Thank you for sharing what you had to deal with and also making the connections to how you were able to get out of it. And it might seem so simple right now looking back, but I'm sure at each moment, whether it was not having clarity
Yeah.
or even having an option thrown to you and having to make that trade-off, I'm sure there aren't many people who have one less rib.
I actually removed it on both sides.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah.
I also appreciate you connecting it back to the fact that, you have to manage uncertainty and take risks, but it's like a calculated risk because if you don't do it, you'll never know. And
Yeah.
then you'll always live wondering,
Yep.
right? And you need closure to move forward.
Yep.
And then, of course, you created value for yourself out of, doing that.
Yep.
Because you then had to recreate whatever that you wanted to do. I know that, you've also started your own not-for-profit group.
That whole sort of crisis, incident, injury changed my life in many ways. I actually tried to make a comeback to sort of professional, like, playing golf. And then at some point I decided that it was not going to happen, right? Like I lost too many years. I don't have full function of my body. So no way I could have competed.
So when was that you figured that you needed to deviate from your original path?
Probably like end of 2019, I was trying to make a comeback. I went back to school. I worked part-time and then I was playing golf at the same time. And then I think COVID or the pandemic was when things came to a bit of a hit. I think naturally every professional athlete in the world had to stop, right? Like you just couldn't. And then I think by then I had to make a decision, like was I going to do this or not? But by then I actually had enough because I had dabbled in a few other things during my injury. Went back to school. I think I had already gone through that reshaping, right? I'm naturally a very, very curious person, interested in many, many different things. I got to know spoke to many different people, just tried out things, with helping out a friend with their deep tech sort of ecosystem. I got engaged with some volunteer work. My mom runs a charity. So then I started doing a bit of that. And then I started to see problems, right, in these sort of different places. I think by the time I had to decide, like I was no longer just Jen the golfer, right? It was much easier to let it go. Today I work full-time in a philanthropic organization. I joke that it's not just full-time, it's full-time plus, right? Because it never ends. But I think if you remain curious and continue like quote unquote dabbling in many other things, right? So I read very widely. I like to speak to different people. Like actually you can run multiple paths on your sort of main path.
Yes.
And that's what I think helps you transition in the long run. So then I volunteered for Majority Trust in 2020 while I was running my little ground up. So we basically pulled together some friends and amazing co-founders to basically try and expose kids who come from lower income backgrounds to opportunities that didn't exist, whether it's through art, music, sports. We ran it for about 2.5 years, and then we realized that actually we couldn't really do it sustainably as a non-profit. So we sort of gave that idea on, passed that idea on to. So I think that, that's also a bit of a lesson there too, right? Because I think on my point about having multiple things that you're doing, it's also not being afraid to like give it up or let it go. So I won't even call it a pivot. I think it's not holding on to anything like too tightly and dearly. Personally, it helped that you don't develop such a strong affinity with any of these things. I think too, it's recognizing that sometimes there are other people in the world that can do a better job than you can. And so actually, if you want to optimize for the outcome, you might not be the right person to do it.
That's a very enlightened view, right? Because most of us, when we get engaged in a project, especially an entrepreneurial project, it becomes our baby and our thing, right? So to detach from it is really difficult.
It's really hard.
Yeah, that's right. So maybe this is a good segue to talk a little bit about spirituality and what is spirituality for you and where are you in that journey?
Interesting question. I was just having a debate with my husband about this. um, so I would consider myself not a very spiritual person. Yeah, I'm a Christian, sort of live my life by the gospel as much as I can, but without going into too much detail there, religion-wise. Yeah, I'm not really in the conventional means a spiritual person. I'm quite pragmatic, as you can maybe tell from everything that you've heard so far. But I think it's also because circumstances have sort of made me that way. Whether you look at sort of different religions and different forms of spirituality or whatever there is, like I think there is a healthy level of introspection, in many of these things, right? Like how do you still and calm yourself? And then that's when the magic happens, right? That's when the introspection that leads to sort of like change. I think years of training as an athlete that I'm generally I built skills around doing that, right? I think the other aspect is I like to joke that I'm a philosophical Taoist, even though I'm a Christian. In the Tao Te Ching, like basically it talks about how the more you know, the more you don't know, right? And actually you're just a rock in the river that gets shaped by the river. Acceptance that you are just one dot in this much wider world, whatever religion that you subscribe to, believe in, right? And you are actually quite unmeaningful. My only responsibility or way about life really is just how can I be as meaningful as possible, and how can I continue to be shaped by the river, right? And how can I ensure that I can shape me to be the best version of myself? But how can I continue to remain humble, right? Because actually, the more I know, the more I don't know.
It's very profound. You've decoded for us detachment and lack of significance, right? With that analogy of a little rock, but which becomes like a pebble
Yep.
in this river, and allowing the river to shape you and your experience and your contribution. So thank you for sharing that. On a related note, do you think it's possible to live a simple life? And what's a simple life?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say that I think growing up in Singapore, and I don't know how many people in the audience are familiar with sort of context and culture, but just a very quick overview. I think everybody here is very kiasu lah. So kiasu is in Hokkien, it means like you're afraid to lose. So there is this sort of inherent race and rat race from a young age, whether it's school all the way to sort of work, and everybody compares, right? So you go to Chinese New Year is tomorrow. I'm very sure everybody will ask me, like, how is work doing? I might even get asked how much I get paid, yeah. So imagine this sort of pressure cooker environment, right? Like where we are built around this sort of meritocratic society where you're always feeling like you are not enough. You always need to be striving for more. And I mean more from a material point of view. I don't think more from like accumulating life experiences point of view. Um, but I do think it's possible, right? Because I had spent some time in living in the U.S. in California, and I became an avid hiker. And I think when you go into nature, then you realize actually you're really smaller, right? And actually, if you think about the ecological systems in the world, you contribute to it for sure. But there is a much wider ecosystem part of my goal to try and enable this thriving, living ecosystem to continue to sort of thrive, right? So my husband's an environmental science sort of major, and we think about ways that we can cut down. I think a simple life as having as few material possessions as possible, and then as having as many life experiences, and like what does it mean to live a simple but rich life, right? And I think rich in terms of you experiencing life. So we're big snowboarders. We love the thrill of adrenaline that comes with snowboarding and rock climbing and being in nature, but also like rich in terms of contributions to others, right? So we volunteer together. We try and think of ways that even for birthdays, right? Like how do we use birthdays not as a way to receive gifts, but also to give back to the community, right? So yeah, I think simple can sometimes be very like sort of narrowed to just I don't want to have anything. I just want to have simple goals and aspirations. But I don't think I see simple that way. I think I see simple as from the sort of material perspective that actually you don't have to overcomplicate life by saying that I want to have X amount net worth. I want to have X amount of like sort of material possessions by this year, right? Like actually like who defines these goals? How do you even come to them? Yeah. So I think simple from a lifestyle perspective, but how do we continue to not have I guess simply rich ways of living, right? And rich being defined by experiences and people and cultures and yeah. So yeah, that's what sort of my definition of what a simple life looks like.
Great, great. Thank you for that. I want to circle back to what we started off with, and that's your work with philanthropy and impact. And can you share what's actually shaping that industry and why it's important?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, so as I said earlier, I chanced upon this sort of, if you will call it an industry. I think the industry has gone through significant change in the last 5 years since I've been here. I've been at Majority Trust for 6 years, sort of been adjacent to philanthropy for about the same amount of time. You have more conversations now about people giving away their wealth than maybe ever. I think there's this growing, what Peter Singer will say is a moral responsibility, but I think feeling like if I have benefited from the rat race, from this capitalistic world that we live in, then there's something that we need to do to give back.
Right.
So I think that's sort of underpinned philanthropy for decades, right? But I would say over the last 5 years, that has changed dramatically. And that it's not just about giving back in doing good. And in very simple terms, philanthropy is a very big word, but in Chinese, it means the words for philanthropy is 慈善, which basically just means giving and loving, right? So it's a much simpler way of describing what philanthropy is. But there is a professionalization of philanthropy in that now we are thinking a lot about how do I make the dollar go furthest? How do I optimize it? How do I encourage more people to give by creating a meaningful experience? And then how do I utilize that $1 to really effect change, right? In specific sectors, whether it's in mental health or it's working with elderly or in providing water and sanitation or in poverty alleviation. And then you can do that at many different levels, right? You can do that at the local level that we do at Majority Trust in Singapore, or you can do that at the regional level, you can do that at the global level. So I think it's a very exciting time to be in philanthropy because we're unpacking a lot of these questions, right? Like, what does it mean to really move the needle in a specific issue? And who are the ecosystem sort of players and stakeholders that need to come to the table? And it's probably one of the sectors where whether you're a big corporate, you're government, you're an individual philanthropist, you're a small charity, or you're a social enterprise, or like we're all quite outcome focused, and
Mm.
that it's probably the one sector where everybody will come to the table, including like natural competitors, right?
Yes.
You know, many different banks coming together to collaborate on fighting a issue, right? So I think it's how do we use these um, social issues to unite and bring very diverse stakeholders together
Mm.
to then say, sort of envision and reimagine what the world could look like if certain problems were solved, right? So if poverty did not exist, I mean, that's a it's a tall order, right? But what are the steps that we can take to ensure that income inequality reduces in
Correct.
even a country like Singapore? So I think this is an exciting time because these questions are now being asked, and the stakeholders at the table are also ready to sort of engage.
Mm.
And a large part of my work now is sort of leading the advisory team at Majority Trust. Is we believe that in order to do all of that, you need more resources. In the philanthropy sector in Singapore, the charity sector in Singapore is $2 billion. To give you a gauge, like all of sort of philanthropic donations annually. Our health budget in Singapore for 2026 is $20 billion. Our defense budget is way more than that, right? We're really only talking about a few 100 million that goes towards sort of more niche, underserved, marginalized communities annually. It's a tiny sector. There is a need to grow the giving pie, whatever that looks like, right? So we focus on doing it in two ways. One is how can we encourage more philanthropists who are maybe not ready to give yet? How do we curate the experience? How do we inform them about what's happening? How do we appeal to both the sort of intellectual but also emotional sides of giving to be able to help them make the first check, right? And then we realized that once philanthropists start giving, they probably will likely give more because they have a
Yeah.
good experience, they understand the issue. The more you understand the issue, the more you realize that there's a need to give more
Yeah.
to be able to move the needle. And then I think the second part of it is how do we make philanthropic capital more recyclable, right? How do we ensure that it's more sustainable in the long run? I think it starts by asking two questions. One, where's my money going? Is it really creating the change that I would like to see? So we hold a quite an unpopular view that not all work actually leads to good outcomes, right? So
Yeah.
how can we improve charities in the way that they implement programs on the ground, utilizing sort of principles from implementation science, monitoring, evaluation, and learning? How can we bring in private sector folks to innovate fresh ideas? How do we create more opportunities for collaboration amongst them, right? The resources, not so much that duplication is bad, but so that the resources can be, there can be strategic sort of connections that happen between these organizations. But how do we reinvent philanthropy and giving to charity? Does providing a loan to a social enterprise count? We say it counts because it's a really more innovative way of thinking about creating the change. In the US and the UK, there's even movements towards innovative finance that looks at employee ownership, right? How do we encourage more businesses to be employee owned rather than, I hire people and I pay them really little and I extract from them, right? So how do we move from more extractive sort of philanthropy or extractive sort of capital to more regenerative capital? So I've said many, many things in the last few, but I think it's a really exciting time. And I think our work locally here at Majority is really trying to think about reinventing or constantly trying to do philanthropy differently. And we might try things that fail, and that's fine, right? At least we've tried it. We know maybe it fails because it's not the right time, it's not the right season for it to exist. But at least we've tried it. We document our learnings, and then we move on to constantly trying to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah. So we work in Vietnam and we work with family businesses. And what struck me when you were sharing is the fact that you got to inform the philanthropists to give. I mean, the
Yeah,
people who are in a position to be able to give.
yeah,
And I think that's important, especially so in Asia, because giving is so ad hoc, it's so feeling based, and it's not formalized because like you say, we want to reinvent that whole charity space and the impact space for maybe better returns, as in social impact returns, and that requires steady and constant giving, not ad hoc giving, right? And so how do you get people to move forward and to see that this is also another important area of perhaps developing humanity, because we are contributing towards projects that are meaningful but doesn't get the resources that it requires. what's your typical philanthropist profile? Age group or demographics, right? And what would be your hope to make this more mainstream?
That's a really good question. I would say that there's no one profile. Okay, I'll probably just share three archetypes that we see.
Yeah.
You see families who have done incredibly well. They've built, wealth across many operating businesses usually, and there is a legacy component to it, right? So
Right.
usually, the matriarch or patriarch is perhaps has retired, has actually given in a more ad hoc way, but is wanting to formalize it, and it's really extending the legacy of this person who actually created the wealth for the family. Also, usually when you are a very successful business person in whatever community society, you have contributed to the growth of that society and community.
Yeah.
Whether through who you employ, your products and services. So I think families are one sort of big archetype. And then there's a lot of that we can unpack within families itself. We see a second archetype, which is people who have made their own wealth. They didn't inherit it. And I think usually for them, there is this desire to give back because they too came from a not so great background. So they might have been sort of an ordinary, middle class, lower middle class student, and then went to an average school, and then by luck or hard work, they might say luck, but I would say a lot of hard work and maybe the ducks lining up. Actually, they managed to create a successful business or managed to make more wealth, and then there is this desire that okay, I need to give back to where I came from, right? And then I think there's a third archetype, which is probably the next generations where you might have inherited whether a business or a significant amount of wealth, like in the tens of like how many generations of Rockefellers, right? So imagine if you are now the sort of 17th, okay, I'm making this number up, but 17th generation of the Rockefellers. I mean, the fact that you have a Rockefeller in your name, people expect you to do something.
Yeah.
But then I think that generation is exciting to work with because they are also trying to reinvent. Like giving to them is not just emotional, right? It's almost, I won't say forced, it's almost like expected of them already because you come from that family. But then for many of them who, are very capable, curious, diverse people, then start thinking, okay, what are ways that I can reimagine philanthropy both for myself and for my family. So I think there's a whole group there that, philanthropy takes on a bit of a different shape. So yeah, I think those are the sort of three main archetypes that we see, both locally as well as like globally. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, great. Thank you for, spending the time to create this because we are just about to launch a 9-month program with Next Gen, which actually focuses on philanthropy, impact, and the giving circle.
Yeah, awesome.
So the idea was to get them to do a sensing journey and get involved in a project that will be their introduction to it.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, and I think, just one thing to add is like, I think I came into philanthropy with a more fixed idea of what it looks like, right? Like it's giving away money. I mean, I do that in a very, very small way. But I think I'm now 6 years into it. I'm also rethinking what philanthropy really looks like, right? Actually, if we go back, to what we spoke about earlier, that we all have strengths and unique ways that we can contribute. So I think I'm also seeing and being inspired by people who they might not be cash rich, right? And be able to give in big amounts, but they can make huge changes to the way they run their business, to the way they treat people, to the way they invest, the way they bring up their children. And I think it's all these little things combined, seemingly little things combined, that actually then moves society towards one that is more caring, more kind, more empathetic, right? And naturally, if we are that way as a society, then inequality will naturally reduce, be less extractive as a society. So I would say like probably an encouragement to myself, especially, and also to your Next Gen program. It's also that, philanthropy is not just giving money, right? It's also thinking about ways that we can do good, I think, in society, whatever that sort of mode and medium looks like.
Yeah. So what you're pointing to is that it's important to cultivate that awareness and to speculate on that whole issue as in terms of what can we do, and each one of us can contribute something at least.
100%. Yeah.
Awesome. So I've come to the end of our interview, but I've got some fun questions. So don't overthink it. What's your favorite book?
Wow, that is a very difficult question, actually. Okay, it's a book that I read recently. I
Yeah.
don't remember the name exactly, but it was a book about radical hospitality by Will Guidara. So he was basically the guy who owns a few like Michelin starred restaurants and hospitality. And I think it speaks a bit to what we spoke about with philanthropy, about how do
Right.
we be hospitable to one another.
Oh, lovely. And you've been to at least 50 different countries through your
Yep.
sporting period. And what's your favorite travel destination?
I wouldn't say it's a favorite or it's something that, I went to for golf, but I thoroughly enjoyed my time in Cuba. I spent 2 weeks there. Had the chance to go before borders were shut. And as a Singaporean, you don't need a visa, which is crazy. Um,
Oh,
but yeah, it fundamentally changed my worldview. Yeah, and it's a beautiful country with amazing food. Yeah.
okay. Well, I'll put it down on my list. What makes me scared is the travel hours. How long did it take you to get there?
I was living in California at the time, so it
Ah,
wasn't that
okay.
far. I think it's 4 hours from New York.
Right. Oh, okay. Not too
Yeah,
bad.
it's not too bad.
Okay. Okay. Now, if you could have dinner with anyone, who would it be?
Oh, again, very difficult. But as a golfer, I cannot run
Yeah.
away from this. I would love to have dinner with Tiger Woods.
Oh,
I mean, like all the, controversies and whatever aside,
yeah.
like
Yeah.
I think he redefined sports in more ways than people give him credit for.
Mm, mm,
Golf became athletic because of him.
yeah.
He was the first African American on, what was a very white dominated sport.
Correct.
Yeah, and just has been so dominating. Yeah, so
Yeah. And he's also partly Asian.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Now, if you can have any superpower, what would it be?
What comes to my stream of consciousness is I would like to predict the future.
Oh.
But no, I think I think the superpower is it's probably being able to like connect with people,
Mm,
understand them, whatever that is. Because I do truly believe that whether it's business or life or work, like I mean, what makes life here great is the ability to connect, right?
right.
And
Right.
ability to form friendships and that all makes sort of life more
Mm,
richer and more worth it.
that's true. Although you do a great job with that, Jen. Already.
But time is limited, so yeah, maybe that's the
Okay.
superpower,
Oh, so
like
you just want to be connected to everyone, right? Okay,
to
I
have
got it.
unlimited time.
Yeah. Okay, so the final question is, what's the best advice that you ever received?
uh I think it's probably just like don't be afraid to fail and make mistakes. Like
Mm,
I think I used to be really hard on myself. You can
right.
tell from some of the earlier stories.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but I had a coach once tell me like, hey, if you don't fail, like you don't know what
Yeah,
like you can't succeed without failing, right? Like if you don't
that's right.
reach rock bottom, you don't know what the highs like feel like. So yeah, so I would say don't
Oh,
be afraid to fail.
wow. Did you ever get some terrible advice?
Oh, lots.
Give me one,
Yeah.
if you remember.
Okay, I wouldn't say it's advice. I think it's society's advice in Singapore. It's
Ah,
like,
yes.
just work very hard, get a university degree, get a very good job, and make a lot of money, and buy a car and buy a condo, and then you'll be happy. And I don't actually think that makes you happy. Yeah,
Right. Not don't go after the five C's or the seven C's, right?
essentially.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, it's been really lovely talking to you. And
Likewise, yeah.
yeah, so thank you. And, I'm looking forward to catching up with you the next time I'm in Singapore.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Dr. Ramesh. Yeah, appreciate the questions. Very wide ranging.
Yeah,
And yeah, thank you for having me on this podcast.
my pleasure. Dear listeners, if you've been listening and enjoying the Thriving in the Age of Disruption podcast series, as well as our Mastery Effect podcast series, we will appreciate it very much if you can share with us the topics that are close to your heart so that we can source the relevant experts and change makers and have them be on our show. Do comment below and let us know where you are commenting from and what is it that is of biggest concern to you.